Have you ever felt so consumed by someone that they basically lived in your head 24 hours a day? You'd replay conversations on loop. You'd check your phone every 5 minutes hoping they'd text. And the second they did, even just a hey, you felt this rush, this wave of relief, like you'd been holding your breath and finally got to exhale. But when they pulled away, even slightly, it felt like the floor dropped out from under you. So here's the question. Was that love, or was something else happening entirely? Today we're talking about limerence. What's actually happening in your brain when it feels like you're addicted to a person, and what that experience can tell you about yourself. But before we get into it, this channel, Psychology Vault, exists because psychology shouldn't feel like something you study. It should feel like something that finally explains you. We break down your emotions, your patterns, your relationships, in plain language, with zero judgment. If that's the kind of content that actually helps you make sense of yourself, subscribe. Because if this topic is already hitting a little close to home, what's coming up might change the way you understand everything you felt for that person. Let's go. One thing before we start, I left a question pinned in the comments that's directly about this feeling of being consumed by someone. If any of what I just described already sounds familiar, take a few seconds and answer it. I genuinely read every single reply. 1. Your brain was treating them like a drug. Limerence is a term coined by psychologist Dorothy Tenoff in the 1970s to describe an intense, involuntary state of longing for another person. And the key word there is involuntary. You didn't choose to feel this way. It's not about how romantic you are or how deeply you feel things. What's actually happening is your brain's dopamine reward system is firing in a very specific pattern. Instead of getting a steady hit of dopamine, the feel-good chemical, you get it unpredictably. Sometimes they respond warmly, sometimes they're distant. And that inconsistency is what keeps the loop going. Think of it like a slot machine. If every pull gave you a prize, you'd get bored fast. But if it only pays out sometimes, randomly, you can't stop pulling. That's exactly what limerence feels like. Your brain isn't in love, it's gambling. And that's the part most people never realize. The intensity you felt wasn't proof of how right you were for each other. It was your nervous system chasing a reward that kept moving. 2. Limerence needs uncertainty to survive. Here's the part that sounds counterintuitive, but is completely true. Limerence cannot survive certainty. The moment someone makes it completely clear that they want you, that the feelings are mutual, and that you're safe, limerence fades. Not love, limerence. Because limerence is fueled by hope, ambiguity, and the fear of rejection all tangled together. Psychologists call this intrusive thinking, an almost obsessive mental preoccupation, where your thoughts return to one person again and again, completely uninvited. It's basically the relationship equivalent of that scene in every thriller where the tension builds and builds, the music gets louder, the stakes feel enormous, and then the moment the mystery is solved, the credits roll. Your brain was hooked on the unresolved plot, not the person. When someone was unavailable, uncertain, or just a little bit out of reach, your brain treated that as the problem to solve, and it couldn't let go until it did. 3. You may have been in love with a version of them you created. One of the most disorienting parts of limerence is something called idealization. When we're in a limerence state, our brains actively minimize the other person's flaws and amplify everything we find compelling about them. We're not seeing them clearly. We're seeing a constructed version of them, filtered through our own longing. It's like playing an open-world RPG where you pour hundreds of hours into a character you designed yourself. You're attached to your version, the one with the perfect stats, the right backstory, the qualities you gave them. The actual person in front of you might be completely different, but by the time you're deep in, that distinction barely registers. And this is why limerence can survive even a bad relationship, even red flags, even being treated poorly. Because what you're protecting isn't the real person. It's the idea of them you built in your own mind. 4. Limerence is often a map back to something older. This is the one that usually makes people go quiet for a second. Limerence is rarely just about the person in front of you. Research on attachment theory, the psychological framework that explains how we form emotional bonds, suggests that who triggers our limerence is rarely random. We tend to fall into limerence states with people who mirror familiar emotional dynamics from earlier in our lives. Someone who's a little withholding, someone whose approval feels earned, not given, someone who keeps you slightly off balance. It's like your nervous system has a playlist, and certain people just happen to match the frequency of songs it already knows. You call it chemistry. Your brain calls it familiarity. And that's actually the most important reframe of all. Limerence isn't a sign that someone is your person. It's often a sign that they're activating something unresolved inside you, which means the real work isn't about them at all. Experiencing limerence isn't a flaw in your character. Our brains are wired to bond through dopamine, pattern recognition, and emotional familiarity. This is just what that looks like when it gets dialed up to 10. But here's what you can actually do with this. When you imagined a future with that person, were you imagining them, their real habits, their flaws, the ordinary Tuesday afternoons, or were you imagining the feeling of finally being chosen by them? And if you look at the patterns across your life, do the people who've triggered this feeling in you share something in common? Not physically, but emotionally. How they made you feel about yourself. A relationship that actually looks like love tends to feel a lot calmer than limerence. Not boring, calm, safe. Like you can actually breathe. If you've ever mistaken the ache of limerence for love, you are not alone. Most of us have. Because it feels more intense than anything. But intensity was never the same thing as depth. The fact that you can name this now, that's not a small thing. Awareness is how patterns start to change. Not overnight, but it starts here. If Psychology Vault is helping you understand the parts of yourself that never quite made sense before, subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from. Thanks so much for being here, and until next time, take care of yourself.